Okay. Hello class, we're going to work on inverse functions today. And so we're going to define what an inverse function is based on some knowledge that we already know, and that's our composites. So if we have two functions, we're going to be given, I should write that in there, we're given f and g as functions. If f of g of x is equal to x and g of f of x is equal to x, then we can say that g of x is the inverse of f of x and f of x is the inverse of g of x. And one of the things that we're going to ask you to do is to prove that by finding these composites. So we can say g of x is equal to the inverse of f, and f of x is equal to the inverse of g. And that's what that little one in the subscript, that's not a reciprocal when it's in function notation. That is the notation for inverse. Now, if we want to find the inverse of one, or let's prove this with our f and g here. So we're going to go over here, and find f of g of x. So g of x is x plus 7 over 4. We're going to put that in where that x is. So 4 times the g of x, which is x plus 7 over 4, minus 7. So when I multiply 4 here, these cancel, and I get x plus 7 minus 7, which equals x. So that's one of them. Let's see about this next one. We'll find g of f of x. So we're going to take g, which is x plus 7 over 4, and where we see the x, we're going to put in f of x. So we're going to put in 4x minus 7 for this x plus 7 over 4. Well, negative 7 plus 7 is 0, so that gives me 4x over 4. The 4's can cancel, and that gives me x. So these are inverses of each other. Now, if we wanted to find the inverse of a function and not looking for that relationship, there is a way of doing that as well. And we're going to follow these instructions that are given right here, finding the inverse of a function. The first thing we're going to do, and let's see if I can zoom out just a little bit. Maybe that's as good as I get. All right, we're going to replace the f of x with a y. So down here, we're going to do y equals 2x plus 7. And then we're going to interchange the x and the y. So we're going to do x and y are going to trade places. We'll get x equals 2y plus 7. And then it says solve for y. So we're going to solve this problem for y. I'm going to first subtract 7 from each side. And I get x minus 7 equals 2y. And I want it to be y by itself, so I'm going to divide by 2. So I get y is equal to x minus 7 over 2. Oh, well, I want to trade that in, though. When I'm going to replace the y with this notation, that inverse function notation. So I'm going to say the inverse function of f is x minus 7 over 2. And there's my function notation. Let's try another one. I'll move my paper up a little bit. So on this one, I am going to follow those same steps. And I'm going to change this to a y equals 4x cubed minus 1. And I'm going to exchange my x's and y's. So I'm going to have x equals 4y cubed minus 1. And I want to solve for y, so I'm going to add 1. And I get x plus 1 equals 4y cubed. Then I'll divide by 4. And I get y cubed is equal to x plus 1 divided by 4. I want y by itself, so I'm going to take the cube root of that. That's really messy. So I have y is equal to the cube root of x plus 1 over 4. And I'm going to change that y into our inverse function notation. So it's going to be f of negative 1 inverse of x is equal to the cube root of x plus 1 over 4. And make sure that whole fraction is under the radical. And let's do one more. We've got this one. F of x is equal to 3 over x minus 1. To find the inverse, we're going to take f of x and x, well, take f of x and make it a y. So we get y equals 3 over x minus 1. Then the x and the y will trade places. We get x equals 3 over y minus 1. I'm going to add 1 to each side, and I get x plus 1 is equal to 3 over y. I can think of this as x plus 1 over 1 so that I now have a proportion, and I can take cross products. I'm going to take 3, I'm going to do this one, x plus 1 is being multiplied to the y, and it's going to equal 3. But I want y all by itself, so I'm going to divide by x plus 1, because those will cancel. So I have y is equal to 3 over x plus 1. And then we're going to change the y to the inverse function. Inverse function of f is equal to 3 over x plus 1.